Welcome everybody to the Chess Lab. Welcome to How to Reassess Your Chess, episode 13, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not completely crazy. Yeah, episode 13. So, material, fear of giving up or taking material. So, this is a breakthrough point in our study of this book. In fact, we went over, the introduction, but then the concept of imbalances, meaning what is an imbalance, right? And then we looked at knights, bishops, the bishop versus knights dynamics, and rooks, okay? This is like pieces, but also pawn structure in a way, right? Because when it comes to the bishop, they want less pawns, and in the endgame pawns on both sides. The knights want more of a close position, and they want an outpost, so a square that cannot be exploited by other opponent pawns. The rooks want open files or semi-open files. Okay, but now we're going to go into something perhaps a little bit more psychological. But again, when I say psychological, it's not the wishy-washy psychology thing. It's like, whatever that is, but it's like cognitive biases, you know? As beginner, you are... Sorry for that. You are perhaps trained, but when I say trained, I mean in like reinforced, negatively or positively reinforced in a Pavlovian manner to get used to certain things. Like, for example, you are afraid of taking a pawn because you see counterplay, right? Or perhaps you're afraid to sacrificing an exchange or something. But being afraid of something doesn't mean that thing is dangerous, right? It doesn't mean it's an actual problem. And so in this chapter, let's try to go over that aspect of our psychology when we play chess, and let's try to understand it a little bit. So let's go. Stepping beyond fear. Rook f2 e1. Okay, if we quickly evaluate this position, white has more space, materials equal, our pieces are better. By default, our light square bishop is perhaps the bishop that is less active. And there is an open file in the position. So, boom, we immediately try to take control of it. They counter this control. Boom, rook e6. We had looked at similar plug sacrifices in other lessons. So when he noticed this possibility, he said, I think he's... sorry. Oh my goodness, there is a massive... Wow, sorry for that. Yeah. Okay, let's go back. Over the years, I've given innumerable lessons and lectures where the sacrifice of material has been addressed. Players of all ratings are in general quite comfortable parting with their stuff if a king hand and the promise of a mate is in the air. However, if material should be sacrificed for positional reasons, I've noticed a state of mental rigor mortis strike even the hardest players. They just can't bring themselves to part with a pawn or the exchange. Things you can see, understand, and even feel, if the return is mere positional compensation, a term that reminds us of snake oil. It promises the world, but always remains invisible to the amateur's eye. I never realized the full extent of this problem until I taught one particular student who loved to launch unsound mating attacks. Okay, he'd toss a bishop in the garbage if it allowed him to give the enemy king a few, more often than not harmless, checks. I didn't want to fully discourage his aggressive inclinations, but I did want to show him that there are other ways to win a game, and that attacks are usually a natural manifestation of various positive imbalances. After quite a few lessons, we finally got around to discussing positional exchange sacrifices, and he fell in love with the idea. Every time I will show him an example, he will say, "Man, I wish I could do that." I would assure him that the opportunity would rise, and sure enough, his big chance eventually appeared. In the diagram, it's clear that black has played very passively, but everything seems to be defended. White, seeing that black intended to double on the e-file, played rook f to e1, and after rook f to e8, he followed rook takes e7, and subsequently allowed the exchange of all the rooks. The resulting position looked and is great, but it proved difficult to penetrate, and a draw was the eventual result. I pointed out to White that he could have targeted the two weak pawns on d6 and f6, before or after the rook exchanges, via knight to e4, with bishop to e1 to c3 and queen d2 to b2 to follow, mixed with a well-timed h3, h4. This would have left black in a good deal of pain. However, far more interesting to me was something that most chess masters would do without thinking. And we already saw this rook e6. We had looked at similar plug sacrifices in other lessons, so when he noticed this possibility, he said, "I saw it, but just couldn't bring myself to give the rook away. I don't even get a pawn for it, and there's no kingside attack at all. I wanted to do it because of what you showed me in past lessons, but my hand refused to make the move." Clearly, the ingrained programming that prevents us from giving away material is extremely strong. As a result, the point of this chapter isn't just to give examples of material sacrifice, but also to help the student break down those walls that prevent him from following his imbalanced training. Let's start by asking a simple question. Why is rook e6 such a good move? It's clear that the rook is a monster on this square, and if it's allowed to remain, it not only kills off both black's rooks, but it also adds to the pressure against both f6 and d6. But all this won't mean much to the amateur, who will rightly demand to know why the rook can't be taken. Of course, it can be taken. For example, b takes, d takes. And remember this bishop, right? We said in the evaluation that he's not a good bishop, and now look at him. But now we are left with the following one-sided breakdown of the imbalances. Black, up a solid exchange. White, more queenside, kingside, and central space. She possesses two very active bishops. Yeah. The pawn on d6 is very weak. Yeah. The pawn on f6 is also vulnerable and can be tortured by knight d5, followed by swinging the queen and r-square bishop over the a1 g8, a1 h8 diagonal. The d5 square is a gaping hole, which can be a home to his knight or bishop. The protected passed pawn on e6 is a monster. White's minor pieces are extremely active, while black's two minor pieces are comically placed. Yeah, black's rooks don't have any open files and are both dead. In fact, white's minor pieces are far stronger than the enemy rooks. What's clear is that white has every advantage in the position. And by the way, I just want to bring my 2 cents into this. It's like, if we didn't have that conditioning that the rooks are worth more and all this, like, this position is obviously catastrophic for black. Like, if you really look at it, it's really terrible. Anyways, what's clear is that white has every advantage in the position, while black's only claim to fame is his material advantage. They need to be weighted against each other, and in this case, it's not even close, since, on top of everything else, I'll repeat myself here since it's a very important point, the black rooks, due to their lack of open files, are actually weaker than any one of white's minor pieces. Nevertheless, the mere fact that black has a material advantage is more than enough to convince most players to reject the line starting with rook e6. It's a pure case of logic versus unfounded fear. How can a player get beyond this fear? He has to train himself to view each imbalance as something wonderful, and he has to view material as just another imbalance to be collected or rejected, depending on the nature of the individual position. If a player is... This is huge. If a player is going to master my concept of reading the needs of a position by recognizing and trying to make use of all the imbalances, then he must place material gain or sacrifice on that same list. Yes, some imbalances do have a bit more importance than others. However, although material or an insecure king both demand extra attention, you can't place them on a pedestal and lose sight of the big picture. Philosophy. In all cases of logic versus fear, you must learn to embrace logic by reading the board and doing what it tells you to do. Huge. Huge. Phenomenal. Vasily Ivanchuk against Hari Krishna. Black to move. If I told most non-masters that they could have this position as white, they wouldn't be too pleased. After all, black seems safe enough, and is a pawn up, and also has the move. Nevertheless, white has its perks too, and this must be dispassionately weighted against black's small material plus. Take a moment and see if you can list the imbalances. Okay, so I think that because it's also so many things, it's also important to think about what does this has to do with this chapter. And I think the fact that white is down a pawn, which white is down a pawn, is important. So let's look at it. Black has a central d5 pawn, and that's his advantage, his material advantage. Black has, when it comes to pawn structure, that's pretty much it. There is a e4, e5 square that is weak. We are already exploiting it. Now, when it comes to the pieces, pawn breaks, okay, pawn breaks, I don't know, perhaps g5, g4 for black, but that's crazy. g4 for us, but that's crazy. b4 for us, but I wouldn't say they are like pawn breaks. They want to play, they want to push the d pawn eventually. Okay, anyways, so let's look at the pieces. When it comes to the knight, our knight is fantastic. Their knight's quite bad. Their knight's not good. Their knight's quite awful. There is a way for them to trade it, which is knight d7. But if they play knight d7, we can play knight takes d7, bishop takes d7, queen takes d5 check, and we win the bishop. So they cannot play knight d7 tactically. So our knight is clearly superior to their bishop. Our bishop on d3 is better than their bishop. Their bishop is probably the worst piece. We are pressuring f5, but also, in general, our bishop's quite open. When it comes to the rooks, our rook is fantastically placed on e1, really fantastically placed. The rook on f8 is not fantastically placed. He's not terrible because he's X-ray over protecting the f-pawn, but nah. There are some ideas of rook lifts perhaps on f6, but it's just unrealistic right now. What else? Their queen pressures our knight, but our knight is so nicely controlled, you know. And our rook on a1 is not optimal, so perhaps some, you know, and this rook is on the open file. So perhaps a move that I would consider is rook a to c1. I kind of like that a little bit. There is also this move knight c6, and after pawn takes c6, rook takes c6, but I'm not sure why we will give away this super strong knight for this terrible bishop. I mean, we would be attacking two pawns at the same time, but I'm not a big fan. Like queen c8, for example. But then bishop c5, okay, maybe it has a meaning, but I don't like it. I would probably play rook a to c1 or something. But let's see the evaluation of Silman. Oh, it's black to move. Sorry, it was black to move, but he plays rook a to c1 anyway, so... Okay. Ready? Okay, here is how I see it. Black, one extra pawn. That's it. That's all he has to crow about. Nevertheless, it does carry some weight and forces white to prove sufficient compensation, since if black can hold things together and manage to make some suiting trades, then he might go on to win an endgame with that little extra pawn. White. The d3 bishop is good and active, while black's bishop is not only undefended but also playing the role of a defensive pawn. Black's pawns on d5 and f5 are both vulnerable and will need to be carefully defended. White's knight is a tower of strength, while the black steed is a passive defender. White's queen is far more active than black's. White's control of the open e-file takes aim at the slightly vulnerable e6 bishop and also the whole on e5. When you add up these things, it's clear that white has a lot going for him and full compensation for the pawn. Full compensation for the pawn. In a nutshell, his army is more active than black's. Black has several weak squares in his camp, and white has clear targets on d5 and f5 to attack, while white's position is free from weaknesses. Of course, black is far from doomed, but, using the words of Ivanchuk, for the central pawn, white has a good game and well-placed pieces. The game continued quietly, with white calmly building up his forces and adding pressure to the enemy targets. So we have queen d6, we have rook c1, rook f8, rook c2, perhaps doubling on the e file, perhaps on the c file, bishop d7. The e file was chosen. Note that black's a8 rook is tied down with the defense of a7. Oh, I didn't notice that. a6, queen b6, which is a move I immediately consider, of course is a blunder, fails to queen takes, a takes, knight takes. If the knight takes the knight, the rook is lost, so rook takes e2, but knight takes f6 check, intermediate move, or intermezzo, and then you take the rook and you have a piece. So a6, knight c4, look at that. The knight heads for e3, where it will take aim at both d5 and f5. Queen c6. Of course, if you take the knight with the queen, you lose the queen. So queen c6, knight e3, rook a to c8. g6 will lose to knight takes d5, and bishop to d4, and is GG. GG went out. So rook a to c8, knight takes f5, bishop takes. So now material is equal. But the f6 knight is not really that good. The bishop on f5 looks quite enticing. The pawn on d5 is weak, so usual problems remains. Rook takes c2, rook e8, rook c2. The queen cannot capture the bishop because it's the rook because it's defended by the bishop. Queen d6, g3, g6, bishop c8. And white, who now has material equality on top of the superior minor piece, the bishop dominates the knight, the target on d5 and more activity eventually won after a long battle. Okay. Very nice. So let's go. Material imbalance. The student should carefully look over these first two examples again. Clearly, the first one gave white a dominating position, with black bound and gagged and completely helpless. Players 1400 and higher should feel extremely comfortable, even excited, giving up material for such a one-sided result. Our second example, Ivanchuk against Hare Krishna, was altogether different. In that case, white had good compensation for the sacrificed pawn, but many players wouldn't feel completely comfortable in white's shoes. This kind of nuanced sacrifice would be more natural for players 2000 and higher. Nevertheless, wherever a player is comfortable with something or not, if you read the board and decide that it's the right thing to do based on our battle of imbalances, then you should bravely give it a try. And at the very least, when you see such things occur in master games, you'll finally understand why it was done and have a greater appreciation for the concept. Of course, sacrifices do carry some element of risk, since if you don't get enough compensation or don't use that compensation properly, you can easily find yourself down material in some miserable endgame, or wiped out even earlier by the enemy's greater firepower. Naturally, there will be cases where you think a positional sacrifice is called for, but misjudge the extent of your compensation and go down in flames. Sorry guys, I have to check something on the other page. You will excuse me. In those instances, you have to dust off your ego, analyze what went wrong, and give it another try if the board begs you to do so. Philosophy. Learn to treat material gains and losses as you would any other imbalance. Okay, let's read this last part. Naturally, there will be cases where you think a positional sacrifice is called for, but you misjudge the extent of your compensation and go down in flames. So you can absolutely lose. In those instances, you have to dust off your ego, analyze what went wrong, and give it another try if the board begs you to do so. Philosophy. Learn to treat material gains and losses as you would any other imbalances, okay? A good example comes from my own career. I was never comfortable with giving up my queen for other units. Even if the material I got for my queen put me ahead, I still didn't like it. This mental block stayed with me right up to the high 2100 level, and it was only after I lost a game due to my inability to swap off my queen for the opponent's rook, bishop, and knight. Obviously, this is more than enough for the queen, but unreasoning fear is often a stronger force than logic and facts, that I decided to put an end to the nonsense once and for all. From that point on, I never hesitated to enter such situations. At first, I wasn't comfortable with this other stuff for my queen idea, but if I felt that I would stand well with a solid position and a rook, bishop, and pawn for my queen, I would push fear away and do it. How about 3 minor pieces for my queen? No problem. And slowly but surely, such things became a natural part of my game, and fear stopped playing any role in that kind of decision. My philosophy was clear. If you lose, you lose. But at least you have the courage to stand up for what you think is right for the position. This is huge. This is huge. I love this. If you lose, you lose. But at least you have the courage to stand up for what you think is right for the position. I love this. Let's go. There's nothing worse than getting pushed off the board and realizing that a lack of self-confidence didn't allow you to even put up a fight. Philosophy. Don't allow yourself to develop a fear of any aspect of the game. Once that fear becomes a habit, your ability to progress in chess will be severely hampered. Positions with various forms of material inequality are the basis of many cases of psychological chess paralysis. This is very important. Huge. This book is so good. Okay, Peter Svidler against Sergei Movsesian, Nanjing 2008. So let's go. So this is some opening. This is some opening. This is some opening. D4. Bishop F3. Bishop F4. Sorry, Bishop F5, Queen F4, Bishop G5. Queen takes, okay. There's a little tactic. You know, the queen's attacked. I win your bishop, you win mine. Okay. A sharp Sicilian led to the following complex position. White c2 pawn is about to fall, which is this guy here, which leaves black with a scary looking passed d pawn and approximately equal chances, or the more macho Bishop G4, which is the prelude to an exchange sacrifice. Svidler decided to go for the gusto. I don't know how to pronounce that. Bishop G4, H6, and here, if you move your queen, I guess you are in problems, like, I don't know. But rook takes. And here, if you take with a queen, I guess you can, in a way. But queen g7 was played. And 2 pieces are hanging. Oh no, if you take with the queen, the rook on f5, I take with the bishop. You have to take my queen and then I take your rook on c8. Okay, I guess. So queen g7, queen e7. This eventually allows black to gain a bit of time kicking the queen around. Queen h4 was better with equal chances. Queen e7. G takes, bishop takes, which defends d3. Optically, this looks pretty good. White gets a pawn for the exchange. c2 is well defended. The enemy pawns on a7 and d4 need looking after, and the position of the black king has become a bit drafty. It's clear that white has real compensation, but there is a problem. White needs to play with energy and try to develop some initiative. If black can prevent this, and if he can consolidate his position and activate his rooks, they might end up overpowering the white army. Indeed, after some errors, this is exactly what happened. So rook e8, queen d6, rook f1, king g7, g3, queen d5 check, king to g1, rook to d6, queen to d8, queen to e6, queen to b8, rook to b6, queen to d8, rook to d6, queen to b8, rook to d5. Black doesn't repeat, he's going for it. Rook f4, rook g5, rook f3, queen e5, queen d8, h5, rook f2, rook e6. The game continues, and here rook to e4 was played. Rook e8 gave better chances to hold. Sorry, but the chessable just died for a second. So rook e4 is a blunder. Rook e8 gave better chances to hold. After rook to e4, the game is just over. So rook e4, queen f2, king h1, h4. So was Widler exchange sacrifice the wrong thing to do? Will the trauma make him avoid such sacrifices in the future? Not at all. His decision made good sense, but he was outplayed and the game slipped out of his hands. It happens to everyone. I guarantee that he'll be making many more exchange sacrifices as his career continues. Only by trying something and getting hands-on experience can you truly understand it. And even if you courageously go for a grand scheme and it all goes to hell, you still feel proud of yourself for giving free rein to your creative doppelganger. Let's go! I like this. I'm gonna try it. Next tournament, we bowl. Let's go. Next tournament, we lose 20 points and we bowl. Let's go. I think I know what this game is. And I agree. Some people consider this game to be the greatest of all time. I agree. And if it's the game I think it is, Boris Spassky played so good. Spassky played extremely good in this game if it's the game I think it is. It could not be. But if it is, kudos to Spassky. It's clear that giving up material takes courage, but the same courage is often needed to take material. e4, knight f6, e5, knight e5, d4, d6, knight f3, g6, bishop c4, knight b6, bishop b3, bishop g7. Someone may argue this is not the most brilliant opening by black, but knight b2, d2. I'm not sure this is the game that I think it is. Castle, h3, a5, a4. Yeah, maybe. No, I don't think it is. but maybe, I don't know. D takes. Some people consider this game to be the greatest of all time, though our focus will be on the initial grid, not the later brilliance. In this position, Fischer is putting some pressure against the space-gaining e5 pawn, though is easily defendable. Oddly, the most accessible target, remember that something is only weak if you can bring pieces to bear on it, is the pawn on a4. Knight a6 to c5 combined with queen e8 and if need bishop d7, but capturing it, which entails a loss of time, will give white definite compensation in the form of central space and development. As black tosses everything at a4, white will be getting the rest of his army out. In this example, we aren't looking at the safe consumption of a weak pawn. Instead, we are going to see a player create divergent imbalances, the trade of time development for material, in an effort to sharpen the play and give himself a shot at victory. Naturally, this approach can lead to joy or despair, depending on whether the bout of grid is positionally and or tactically justified, and on which player can handle the tension better. No, I think this was the game where Spassky won the pawn that Fischer gave it to him, but never mind. Knight a6, castle, knight c5, queen e2, queen e8, knight e4, knight b takes a4. Here we go. Bishop takes a4, knight takes a4. Black has won the pawn and is doing well, but white's kingside space advantage will allow him to get some play of his own. The rest of the game is an amazing creative achievement by the 11th world champion. Rook e1, knight b6, attacks the pawn, moves it. Saves the bishop pair. Overprotects the pawn so the queen can move. Pressures the knight. Everything's defended. Moves the pawn up. Blocks the b-pawn. Attacks the knight. Knight moves in. Oh my goodness. Okay, so here what happened. Just a trade of pieces. f6. Takes, push. Tries to control the e5 square. King to f7. Check, takes. Now g5. Sorry, b5. Rook to f1. Rook to h4. Sorry, rook to h8 prevents h4 perhaps. Bishop f6. a3, rook f4, a2, c4. The promotion square is controlled both by the bishop and the rook, so bishop takes, d7, this is crazy, bishop to d5. So if you play d8, what happens? I guess I can take, you take, I play d8, you take, and it's just equal material, but I have the majority on the queen side. So king g3, rook a3, c3, rook a8, rook h4, try to check, e5, which is just crazy. If you take the bishop, I promote. And if you take on e5, I may also promote, because then you don't have d8. So check, the king can move, check, the king has to go here, takes with check, because the bishop doesn't defend the pawn. This is crazy. Check, king takes d7, gives up the bishop, takes it, king c6. Now I guess you're threatening to promote, because if you take with the bishop, I take with the rook, but then it's a repetition, so I'm not sure he's threatening anything. Before h4, h5, takes, push, threatens bishop f8. So rook g8, threatens the pawn, bishop f8, push, so if you take one pawn I promote the other, king to c2, tries to take the pawn and then defends the other, king back, check, king c3 promotion, king here, that's crazy, pushes the other pawn as well, takes, that's some crazy games. So sometimes going after material entails a certain level of risk, in much the same way that giving it up might be risky, but more often than not, taking material is business as usual. Acquiring stuff is merely the other side of the material coin. In fact, most games are won by eating the opponent's pieces, made possible by his blunders, or via the slow and steady accumulation of positive imbalances that ultimately result in material gain, creating weaknesses, freezing those weaknesses, surrounding them, and finally cashing in. Very complex game. There is a little bit of a lack of analysis in that game, in my opinion, but read this position and you'll quickly realize that black has the superior pawn structure and better place pieces. So, okay, let's do a quick evaluation. 3-3, 3-3, 2-2. Okay, so material is equal. There is a weak pawn on a3. There is a weak pawn on b7. Our light square bishop's active. Our dark square bishop's active. They're also useful. Our knight on c5 on c4 looks great. Our knight on d7 can be improved, obviously. What else? Their bishop on g2 is not super impressive since our strong light square pawn chain. Their knight on f3 is okay. Their knight on e1 is better to not talk about it. Their bishop on c1 is still in the starting square, but is a little bit active and is also useful in the defense though, not in the attack. Our rook on a8 is attacking, the rook on a1 is defending. The rook on f1 is better not to talk about it. And our rook on f1, on f8, to be honest, is not like crazy. Their queen, though, is slightly better than our queen. And if we move our queen, we also connect the rooks. So his main target, read this position and you quickly realize that black has the superior pawn structure and better placed pieces, yes. His main target is a3, which is attacked by the a5 rook, e7 bishop, and c4 knight. So black's plan, though unimaginative, is simple and effective. Win the a3 pawn. Queen b6. Offering the exchange of queens is eminently logical. Why? Because white's queen is defending a3, while black's queen isn't, at the moment, part of the a3 battle. Queen c3, rook a4. Here we go. Not the only way. Continuing the exchange threat by queen a5 was also very strong. However, I wanted to get all my pieces into the party. Knight d3, as you can see, white improves the position of his pieces. So, as you can see, these people, they really play following imbalances. Rook f2a, but because imbalances is just the rationalization of the elements that matter in a position. Knight f to e5. On knight b2, which attacks the rook, there is knight takes b2, bishop takes b2. Held out longer, though white's position will remain throughout miserable. Yeah, also this bishop now is trash because it's looking at this pawn. So knight f to e5 was tried, but now knight d takes e5. Knight takes, and knight takes e5. I played knight takes a3. It's strong and to the point. Won the pawn and eventually won the game. However, knight takes c5 is even better. D takes, bishop c5. The threat of bishop d4 is extremely annoying. If you play e3, there is d4, and this is horrible because if you take, there is the skewer, and if you don't take, I take you, and it's just a massacre. So queen to b2. If you play bishop d4, I play queen takes b6. But now queen takes bishop a3, and the pawn's won. Bishop takes, rook takes, and the extra pawn guarantees black victory, since white has absolutely no compensation, no favorable imbalances for it. Okay guys, was this instructive? Hopefully. Wait, do I have to recreate the moves? Oh hell no. Oh my god. Oh my god. Imbalances versus material. Let's see this game. So, we're talking about H. Uetoa against E. Mayo. Okay, Canada Day Open 1999. The following game, a very complex one, sees Black chatting with two little devils, sitting on both shoulders. One devil, the devil of unbridled sacrifice, tells Black to go for the gusto, and sacrifice his queen. The other devil, the devil of take it while you can, implores Black to eat a pawn on b2. So c4, g6, d4, bishop g7, e4, c5, bishop e3, queen b6, knight c3, c takes d4, knight d5. However, Black noticed a far more creative but not necessarily superior possibility. D takes e3. Wow. In this sharp position, Black can embrace his inner greed by queen takes b2, rook to b1 now, because if you play knight c7, sorry, I skipped a line. If you play knight c7, king d8, bishop to f4, d3, threatening the rook on a1. One funny line is rook c1, bishop to d4, which threatens mate on f1, queen to d2, g5, bishop g3, bishop takes f2. Wow. Because if you take with the queen, you lose the rook with mate. If you take with the bishop, I take your queen and then I take your knight. So let's say rook b1 instead, queen takes, rook a1, rook b1, queen a3, knights check, knight to b5, interesting, queen c5, knight takes, bishop takes, even though queen a5 check is strong, bishop takes, queen a5, king e2, knight f6, and though white has some compensation, he is 2 pawns down. There's nothing wrong with embracing your inner greed. In fact, taking material and daring your opponent to prove its compensation puts a lot of pressure on him, since, to put it in a stark manner, if the sacrifice doesn't work, the game is over. The two most famous greed kings are Grandmaster Larry Evans and Viktor Korchnoi. These extremely successful players will take whatever was offered and then hang on for dear life. Okay, so they take c3. So this is the real game. The real game is crazy. They take, and they take again. And they take again. And they take again. All right. That's right. White has a queen and the move for 2 minor pieces and a pawn. Yet White's position is far from easy to handle. Let's have Mr. Mayo himself explain his logic behind the startling d takes e3. For the queen, Black has an ultra-safe king, 2 minor pieces and an extra pawn, plus almost total dark square control. Interesting. Also, consider because he has the bishop pair, so dark square control because there is no dark square bishop for white. Also consider the lovely square Black gets for his minors. e5, e6, c5, c6, or even d4, back on piece placement. White has a displaced king, development deficit, and a horrible light square bishop, with no active prospects. So White has a displaced king, development deficit, and a horrible light square bishop with no active prospects. He is faced with the immediate loss of 2 more pawns with bishop takes b2, and so his queen is confined to defensive duties. One other critical factor to be considered is that White does not have a single effective pawn lever at his disposal. He does not even have the prospects of an active exchange sacrifice to alter the position, only perhaps passive sacks with rook d5 at some future point. Well, this is very advanced evaluation. In short, Black's pieces will be more active than White's. White has no way to break into the enemy position, and Black has various targets, squares and pawns, that he can chew on while the White position is devoid of any plan. It's clear that Mr. Mayo has a very good grasp of the imbalances and how to measure their pros and cons without falling victim to purely material point count considerations. Okay, I can imagine many of you saying, nice, but I could never do anything like that. Why not? Yes, you have to somehow free yourself of the I can't mindset, which is also explored in part 4. But once you notice d takes c3, and once you see that you'll be giving up your queen for 2 minors and a pawn, don't panic and say, no way! Instead, calmly look at the imbalances in the resulting position, and if you appreciate what you are getting for the material investment, many positive imbalances for material, why not pull the trigger and do it? In fact, if you really want to improve, you should always jump on such situations, win or lose, so you can expand your chess mind and plant the seeds for future success. This is great. In the game, Mr. Maggio's concept came through with flying colors. Queen d2 tries to hold on all the dark squares. Knight to c6. Knight f3. Knight f6. Threatening knight takes c4. Bishop d3. And even if you play e5, knight e4 still. So bishop d3. Knight f2. King e2. Castles. h3, knight g2 e5, again trying to exploit the dark squares, knight takes, knight check, king f2, bishop takes c5, rook h2 f1, d6, king g1, bishop e6, queen b4, attacks b6 and defends c4, knight f6. Now if you take on b6 there is bishop d4 check that wins the queen and the game, because white will be left with too little material. So queen b5, rook a5, again taking the pawn, bishop d4, so queen b3, rook f2 a8, pressure on the pawn, a3, b5. Now if you take, there is perhaps knight d4, which is annoying. So queen back to, with the pawn of course, so queen c2, b takes. Now, if you take, there is perhaps rook c5, so bishop back to e2, bishop d4 check, king h1, knight e5, rook a to d1, bishop c5, rook f to e1, b5, queen c3, rook a4, rook to f1, b4, a takes, rook takes, pressure on b2, rook a1, rook b8, rook a2, rook b3, queen goes back, rook e3, queen to c2, c3, takes, 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 rook takes c3. So now they have a rook and a knight and 2 pawns for the queen. Bishop g4, a rook e3, and here bishop e6. Perhaps they missed this move. Bishop d5, king g7, queen e6, f6, sorry, e6, bishop takes, here we go, f takes, rook takes, king takes. So now they have 3 pieces, 2 minor pieces and a rook, and a pawn for the queen. But check, check, queen a8, rook e1, bishop g1, bishop d4, bishop e5, rook e3, and black won. This was very advanced stuff, but it wasn't about calculation at all. Ultimately, it came down to having faith in the power of lesser imbalances over material, and this is a concept that you can, slowly but surely, train into your psyche at almost any rating level. Remember, if you create imbalanced vision and make the search for and understanding of imbalances an addiction, your playing strength will take a quantum leap forward. Nice. Okay, so now there is another game. W. Brown against Jeremy Silman, American Open 1998. Our next example shows a pawn sacrifice that directly addresses the imbalances and goals that both sides were trying to achieve. Okay, d4, d5, c4, c6, knight f3. Silman, as usual, going for the Slav. King takes g7 is wild. What the fuck? Okay. g5. This position is an easy read. I mean, if you say so. So 3, 3, 3, 3. Materials equal. Their light square bishop I don't like. Our light square bishop I like. Our knight I like. Their knight I don't like. Our queen I like. Their queen... I mean, the queen can become very dangerous. Our rook I like. The rook I like. This rook I don't like. This rook I like a little bit more. This position is an easy read, but white's bad pawn structure. Black's king is vulnerable and needs to be cared for, while white's pawn structure is a mess. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even say it out loud that the king was weak, but obviously he's weak. Quite simply, black will have the advantage if he can find a safe haven for his king. Note how I didn't mention the threat of g takes h6 check. The reason is that one should have a firm grasp of the imbalances and the goals that their existence creates, before thinking about threats and replies to them. Now that we know what both sides are trying to achieve, white wants to attack the enemy king, black wants to find a safe home for it, and then punish white's weak central pawns, the correct move for black will make perfect sense. Bishop to g6. Played instantly. Bro is flexing. All of a sudden, black's weak points, f7, is cemented, and h5 is no longer a landing space for white's queen, are solidly defended. And white's position begins to crack and whine. Why is bishop g6 a hard move to find? We have been conditioned to avoid losing material. In this case, you are giving up a pawn with check, so the mind automatically screams, don't let him take it, and blinds you to all other possibilities. That's why creating an imbalance-oriented base of knowledge about every position you reach is so important. Key! Alright? Knowing a position's priorities allow you to step beyond the emotive mind and make decisions where logic, not emotions, rules. Brown hoped for h takes g5, queen h5, when white's pieces are getting uncomfortably close to the black's king. But okay, after bishop to g6, there is g takes h6. If b4, there is queen takes e5, and if you take my knight, I take your knight. So g takes h6, now king h7. White's a pawn ahead, but the bits on e5, e4, and h6 are like overripe fruit that black can pick whenever he wants to. Equally important is the black king new situation. It's found some welcome cover on h7, and the white pawn on h6 actually plays the role of traitor since it's suddenly giving shelter to the opposing king. I felt very confident here, but both of us now had only 3 minutes to make 16 moves. So bishop f4 was played, bishop e7. The critical move and my original intention was rook d4. Bishop e3, rook a to d8. Bishop takes, rook a to d1, rook takes d1, rook takes d1, queen takes c5. Brutal. When black has all the play, but h2, h4, h5, ghosts began to nag at me, and having no time for a deep look, irrationally won out, and I decided to stop the h-pawn in its tracks. So bishop e7, now h4 is prevented. I passed on a knight to d7 due to h4. Okay. Rook f2, rook d4, here we go. Going after the e5 pawn by knight d7 was also tempting, but the clock was ticking and a decision had to be made. But the clock was ticking. So rook g2, rook g8, bishop e3, queen takes e5. I had been dying to sacrifice the exchange all through this game, and now I jumped at the chance. However, this was not the best moment to do so. The safer was rook d7. The safer rook d7 would have left black firmly in charge, since bishop f4 is strongly met by bishop f6. Bishop f4 is strongly met by bishop f6. Okay. So queen e5. Bishop takes, queen takes, king h1. I had thought that I stood better here, but a quick look convinced me that things are actually far from clear. Knight takes e4, on king takes h6 with an edge is best, but he didn't occur to me during the game, so he played knight takes e4. And now bishop d3, knight takes c3, bishop takes g6, rook takes g6, b takes, queen takes, rook f1, bishop f6, rook takes g6, king takes g6. With no time left, neither side wanted to touch this position, so I guess they agreed to a draw. I should point out that offering various material imbalances is part of many highly respected openings. Will stretch positional sacrifices here and not attack base sucks. A few examples will follow, okay? So, the Stockholm variation of the classical dragon. Let's go. e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4. So this is some classic fossil, classical dragon. g4. This position was once thought of as quite dangerous for black. But when the discovery of rook a to c8, g5, rook takes c3, g takes, because if you take on c3 there is knight takes e4, I guess. That's why you remove the defender of the e4 pawn. Rook takes, whoa, that's wild. Queen takes, bishop takes. Hit the streets, the whole line was recognized as innocuous for white. So g4, let's go, rook a to c8, g5, rook takes c3, g takes, rook takes, bishop takes. Why is this acceptable for black? Aside from the fact that he has a pawn for the exchange, making the material investment minimal, white's king is also a bit insecure. Black's bishop is not only very active but also serves as a magnificent defender of its own king, and black enjoys the superior pawn structure. Another problem for white concerns our eternal search for a plan. White has no play on the queen side or in the center, and aggressive posturing on the king side will rarely work because the bishop single-handedly protects its king. An example of this will be given in the notes that follow. Black, however, can generate queenside play by the advance of his A and B pawns, a minority attack, and also place pressure on e4. Rook c8, rook c4. All in all, it's thought to be equal, but I consider it to be somewhat dreary for white. The game Filipovich, Hollis, Mariansk, Ladzny, 1962 continued. c3, rook c8, a3, rook c4. The e4 pawn is now under some heat. Rook a to e1, b5, starting the classic minority attack. Black intends to move his queen, play a7, a5, and then b5, b4, creating white's queenside pawn structure, cracking white's queenside pawn structure, and leaving him with yet another weakness to guard in that area. Rook f3, queen c7, f takes, h takes, rook h3, a5, rook f1, queen b7. White's attack is an illusion. Queen c5, which only offers equality, was played in the actual game. Wow. And now rook e1 to defend. Queen h6 looks scary, but dragon players, and anyone that regularly fianchettos his kingside bishop, know that it's very hard to make a king when the defender's uncontested. White doesn't have a dark square bishop to challenge it. Dark square bishop defends g7 and h8. Rook takes e4. Black laughs at white's so-called attack, since queen h7, king f8 isn't anything for white, but of course I wonder. Rook takes f6, there is check. You're getting... This white having to choose between king f1, queen h1 with a winning attack, and rook g3, rook takes, pawn takes, pawn takes, 2 pawns up for black. Okay. The immediate rook takes f6 might seem to be a better move order, but it also fails. Rook takes, and of course on queen h6, rook g4 transposes, so rook g6, pawn takes, queen g5, on queen h6, rook g4 transposes, or something. Now defends, and white is in serious trouble. On queen h6, queen b6 check, and you're feeling the heat. So rook e1. So queen b7, rook e1. b4. 8 takes b4, 8 takes b4, and white is under severe pressure. His queen side is falling apart, and as we have seen, his attacking leap 27, queen e6 just doesn't get the job done. That's crazy, but as you can see, it's very difficult, right? It's not simple. Catalan opening. Wow! So now we're gonna see some openings where Fischer-Spassky, where it's actually okay to give up some material. Ooh, and then there's the summary. Okay, I'm gonna leave the test for the next time. So we're gonna do these last 2 lines and then I'm gonna call it a day. Okay. One would think that many players with white would be delighted to achieve such a position by move 13 of the opening. Let's see. So this is a Catalan. Black takes a pawn. Black still up a pawn. That's some absolutely crazy shenanigans. What's going on? Queen c2. Queen takes castle. What's going on? So, white has a queen for a bishop and a rook. White has a queen for black's bishop, black's rook and bishop, thank you Silman, and all of white's pawns are healthy and his king is safe. So why would anyone in his right mind actually play for this position as black? Shockingly, world-class Grandmaster Ulf Andersson often reached this position, which he considered to be a drawing line. And he proved it over and over by halving the point with many of the world's finest players, Kasparov included. Why is black okay here? Quite simply, his position is devoid of weaknesses. He's extremely solid, his c6 bishop gives him ownership of the light squares, and white found it more or less impossible to tear down black's fortress. In other words, white's only favorable imbalance is his material advantage, and that alone isn't enough to generate any real winning chances. One sample, the game Polygaevsky-Anderson, Moscow 1981, is enough to show just how solid black's game is. Knight c3, so white develops, rook fd8, bishop e3, white develops, knight e5, knight takes, a bishop pair, control of the open files, of course nothing. Bishop d4 threatens mate, so bishop f8, e4, attacks the bishop moves, h4, now you of course switch to the open file, bishop, they are both open files, D and C, but if there are bishops in the way. Now he prepares to doubles up, prevents h6, could be annoying, doubles up, consolidates, infiltrates, and prepares some discoveries perhaps. I don't really know what's going on. So rook c2, bishop a4, b3, bishop back to c6, very solid, queen to f4, bishop to d6, bishop to e5, bishop back, bishop c3, and it was a draw. Yeah, very solid by Ulf Andersson. Very nice. Rui Lopez, martial attack. Fischer-Spassky, second Piatigorsky Cup 1966. So this is not the World Championship match, but it's a little bit before. Material sacrifices that create a battle of the imbalances are commonplace in virtually every opening. An excellent example of this is the highly popular martial attack, which sees black offering a pawn for a lead in development, active pieces and slight weakening of the light squares in white's kingside, and good dynamic chances. On the other hand, white has a solid position and an extra pawn. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle, bishop e7, rook e1, b5. So Spassky is black. So our protagonist is Spassky. I think that Spassky had a decent score against Fischer before the match, so maybe Spassky will win this. So knight takes. I could be off, but c6. So black's down a pawn, white's up a pawn. In the diagram, both sides have put their fate in their respective short and long-term imbalances. Black has a lead in development, and at times scores a brutal knockout. However, even if white nullifies the immediate threats and trades into an endgame, the active black pieces still offer excellent chances for a draw. G3, knight f6, d4, bishop d6, rook e1, bishop g4, queen d3, c5, takes, bishop f4, h6, knight a3, g5, bishop back to e3, bishop takes, rook d2, infiltrating, knight c2, rook e8, rook takes, knight e3, bishop f3. Minus a pawn, but black has enough compensation. Bishop c2, knight d6, b3, king f8, e4, maybe you want to go to c4, saying if you take my knight, I take your bishop, and if you don't, I take your knight and then your bishop, so it's a little bit awkward, so b3 stops that. If you go to f5, of course, I just take with the bishop and I win, so king f8, a4, knight e4, bishop takes, pawn takes, b4, rook b2, g4, king g7, king f1, king f6, rook a5, rook b1, king e2, rook b2, and the game was agreed to a draw. White still up a pawn, but black still active. The draw is now forced. King d1 would be dangerous only for white. Bishop d3, defends the pawn and threatens f2, check, takes, pushes, attacks the knight, knight goes back, takes. It's clear that black's compensation for the pawn isn't just a hope and a prayer, it's based on sound positional considerations that last late into the game. One might wonder why everyone wouldn't play a line that gives black short-term attack and long-term positional compensation. The answer is that white has many ways to avoid falling victim to a fast mate, and though the resulting positions are awful drawn, black has to suffer a bit, perhaps not the kind of result keen attacking fans would dream of, but fully acceptable as far as theory is concerned. Yeah. Interesting though what he's saying here. Pleasant, but probably not winning. Okay. It must also be admitted that many players with the white pieces aren't too excited by those pleasant but probably not winning endgames. These unsatisfied souls constantly seek new ways to steer the pot. One sample: d4, bishop d6, rook e1, queen h4, g3, queen h3, rook to e4, g5, queen f1, avoiding bishop takes g5, queen f5 attacks the rook and the bishop. It's not wise to put too many pieces on undefended squares, okay? Queen takes f1, king takes f1, bishop f5, ooh, f3, look at that. h6, knight d2, b takes, f takes. When a major change in the mutual imbalances has occurred, White's now down an exchange, but he has a pawn for it, a nice center, and two bishops. Full compensation, but the chances are probably more or less balanced. There is no doubt that material is a major imbalance, with greed winning many games and also losing its share too. If you train yourself to view material as just another, you'll open up a whole new level of understanding when sacrificing for tactical or positional compensation is always on the table. On the other hand, bravely taking everything your opponent offers should also be part of your overall mindset. In either case, the decision depends on a calm assessment of the imbalances that both sides end up with. Okay, so that's nice. So, summary material. How can a player get beyond his fear of parting with material? He has to train himself to view each imbalance as something important, and he has to view material as just another imbalance to be collected or rejected, depending on the nature of the individual position. If you create imbalance vision and make the search for and understanding of imbalances an addiction, your playing strength will take a quantum leap forward. Yeah. If you create imbalance vision and make the search for an understanding of imbalance and addiction, okay. Imbalance vision, okay. search and understanding of imbalance. Embrace your inner greed. Having a material advantage gives you a larger, more powerful army, which can translate to greater force being brought to a key sector of the board, and or the long-term advantage of endgame odds. Knowing that most endgames will win for the material upside grants him tremendous flexibility. So by all means, eat everything in your path as long as you're aware of what, if anything, your opponent is getting in return. If you read the board and decide that it's telling you to sacrifice material for a host of positional pluses, don't hesitate to do so. Learning to conquer your chess fears and prejudice is a huge part of improving your overall game. Being material ahead usually makes a player feel warm and fuzzy, but it's an imbalance and must be weighted against all the other imbalances. It might offer a decisive plus, or it might pale in comparison to different static or dynamic imbalances, compensation in any given position. Notice how sacrificing material and seeking material gains have been placed together. Yeah, both treat material as an imbalance, not something to be feared, avoided, worshipped, or always embraced. And the assessment of either decision, for example, to take or to sacrifice, has to be based on the other imbalances on the board. This is very nice, of course. Material tests. So material is truly an imbalance. So this was not about psychology, perhaps. I mean, it was, but also like it's really just an imbalance. So, of all the tests section in this book, I think this one requires more from the reader than any other. Be very aware that material is the force point here, and try to be honest and fearless about all material or possible material imbalances. Afterwards, play over the answers and analysis until you feel that you are comfortable with the strange goings-on. Your rally cry must be, material is an imbalance, and I'm willing to both take it and give it up, depending on the nature of the other imbalances. Doing so will help you make the transition from the material is king mindset that traps so many in a lifelong rut. I don't know how to pronounce that. If you have trouble solving the tests, don't worry. That means we have uncovered something you don't understand, and this allows you to fix things by rereading the previous material or by picking up the bits of knowledge you are missing in the answers. All right, so that was it. Okay, so in the next episode of How to Reassess Your Chess, this beautiful series, we are going to go over part 4 tests. So we're going to go over tests about material. But for today's episode is everything. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy your chess.